Welcome to Fly on the Wall podcast. I'm your host, Chris Sonksen, CEO and founder of Church Boom. Here you get to sit in on a live coaching session as I coach pastors through the ministry challenges we all face. If you find this podcast helpful, please make sure to like, subscribe, and share. Hey everyone, today we're talking with my good friend, Loren Hicks, and we are talking about the subject of how do you work with leaders when they're resisting change. And before we jump into that conversation, I want to remind you to check out churchboom.org. One of our latest things is our coaching certification program. If you've ever thought about coaching, what it would look like for you to become a coach, not just with Church Boom, just on your own, and an opportunity to coach other pastors, maybe create some income for yourself, or whatever it is that you would want to do with it. Go check out churchboom.org. You'll find the coaching certification. I think it's an incredible program. We just launched it, and we are getting incredible reports from people. But anyway, let's jump into the conversation now with Loren Hicks as we talk about what do we do when staff members and leaders are resisting change. How can I help you today, and what would you like to talk about? What's on your mind?
Well, I got three things. First of all, the church is really growing. Coming out of COVID, prior to COVID, the church had two services and has for many years. We have a large auditorium and had a larger attendance. And then, of course, we went outside for COVID services. And then coming back inside after COVID, we were still trying to have two services because that's just what we'd always done, and it really didn't make sense because the attendance was so much smaller. And so we went back to one service and gained really instant momentum, just having everybody back in the room as a larger one crowd. And now we have grown to where we have filled that auditorium now. And so this summer we're in the middle of a complete auditorium remodel this summer. And so our plan is to go to two services in September. We could do it today, but we want to wait until we get finished with this remodel here. But I'd like to know just your heart. I know this is a topic that comes up often in your coaching, but transitioning back to two services, what are some essential elements that you would suggest? Like, what are some key things? I know you led through this several times, as a lead pastor, and you're seeing this in other churches. So I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first of all, that's awesome that I know you got a big auditorium, and then to be able to fill that up and say, okay, now we got to go to a second service. That's great. That's an accomplishment all in itself. So that's awesome. Way to go. Couple things that I would encourage you to do. The first thing I always tell everyone is, if you're going to start another service, don't start it, plant it. And there's a difference. And I think people have to really think that through. A lot of times what I see, Loren, is that a pastor will say, hey, we're going to launch another service or whatever. We're going to start another service. And then they just kind of promote it 3 or 4 weeks before. And then they get, that Sunday comes, and then they're just wondering, well, let's see what happened. They were going to roll the dice. I highly recommend you don't. You might have heard me talk about this on a podcast, but this is now specific to you. I would want to know who's coming to what service. I would try to find that out probably 6 weeks in advance if I could. I'd want to know who's coming to what service by them filling out a form or a card or QR code, whatever you want to do. But I'd want to know who's coming to what service, first thing. So, hey, we're going to have two services now, 9:30 and 11, or whatever you're going to do. The who's coming to what service. That's first of all. Then once I know that, I'm going to try to balance it out if possible. So if it's like, whoa, I didn't expect 80-20, this is not good. You want to get it closer to 60-40. I mean, 50-50 is amazing, but 60-40 would be a win itself. So if you get to a point where it seems like one service is, for whatever reason, it's really heavy on one service, we're going to try to move people over to try to help balance that. That's one thing. The next thing is as you lead up to it, if there's a way, and you got to figure out what works for you, but if there's a way to sort of create energy and synergy around two different services by possibly separating databases for that 6 weeks and then the first 4 or 5 weeks into the new service. So let's say, you didn't have to go through all the shifting around of, people because it ended up being 60-40. You're good. Okay, great. Now, so you say that, do that on a Sunday. Monday rolls around and you're creating a separate database. So it's like, all right, I'll upload all these emails and these cell phone numbers in what we call Service 1 team group, and all these emails and cell phones in Service 2 team group, or whatever you want to say. Now, when you're communicating, let's say you want to send an email, you want to send a text, maybe you do a quick 60-second video, you can address everybody to that personal team. So you can be like, let's say you just did a quick iPhone thing, hey, this is Pastor Loren here, a little 60-second thing. Hey, I want to talk to all of you that I'm calling, early service people or Service 1 people, or, the Service 1 team or whatever. You guys are committed to come to the 9:30, and I just wanted to send you a quick thing. Man, this week be praying. Think about who you can be inviting. Think about, whatever you want to do. And then you finish that one, send that out, and then obviously same day you turn around and, hey, Service 2 people, but what you're basically doing is just really strongly promoting to each service as if they're a team unto themselves. It's almost like, why I call it not starting planting, it's almost like a mini version of a church plant. And as much as you can communicate with them, as much as you can discuss with them, that's video, whatever, as much you can do. Some groups, I'm not saying you're going to do this. I'm just throwing out more. I'm throwing a bunch of stuff on the wall, and whatever what sticks for you, Loren, sticks. Yeah. But I've seen it even go as far as this. They actually, when they had one service, they said, hey, on the 10th of the month, this month, all that are coming to the first service, please hang out for 20 minutes after the service. I would like to meet with you somehow. I don't know if that's even possible. And then the next week you do this service too. Right. But the point, whether you do that or not, the point is that you are communicating and creating energy. The second thing I would do is that leads you up to the day of the launch of the second service. Now, what I would do is I would encourage you to think about that launch day and then the next 90 days. What could we do on launch day and in the next 90 days that would create some energy? So if I was doing a launch day of a service, I would try to do something. I would try to have something that meant something to people that were not in our church. In other words, if you have the coach of whatever university, or you've got the running back of a university, or you've got some guy that came in 4th place on America's Got Talent or whatever, like something, don't give them the whole service. Never give away the service. Just give them like 10 minutes, interview them, whatever they do. Like we had an American Idol guy. We interviewed him for 10 minutes. He sung a song and then he was done. So we just shortened down the worship, shortened down the message. But we wanted people to see the product for what it really was. Some people give away the mic, and I'm like, well, but you're not really showing the product. You need to show the product. Right. But have something. So think about like 6 weeks before, we've got first service group, second service group, and we're leading up to this really cool launch day, which is going to be amazing because we're going to have this person. Okay, that's great. And hopefully we get a ton of new guests. Now, what we're going to do is, what are we going to do? Now launch day is over. What are we going to do for the next 90 days? Maybe that's 12 weeks, or maybe it's the next 60 days, which would be 8 weeks. Is there something we could do the next week for children? And then 2 weeks later, do one more thing for adults. And then 2 weeks later, do something for children. Like something that is like, I'm not talking about spending a ton of money, but I'm talking about something that keeps energy going. So we want to treat it like a church plant, get a ton of new people there as best as we can, and then take the next 60 to 90 days, whatever you feel comfortable with, and say, what could we do that would be really cool? Maybe, hey, man, here's the church at a glance. 4 out of the next 8 weeks, we're doing something. So after the launch, it's like, we're doing something really cool the next week, and then 2 weeks later, then 2 weeks later, then 2 weeks later. And it could be just like we're doing some big thing for kids, or then the 2 weeks later, we're doing maybe another something for adults. But I think one of the Outreach Magazine said the greatest way churches see bumps in attendance is when they have a new building, have a new addition to a building, or add a service. And adding that service, I feel like some people just start it. And it's almost like using a surfing term. It's kind of like you're out there, you're waiting for that perfect wave. You're like, nope. And you don't really paddle for that wave. And you miss the wave. And you're like, man, now I got to sit here for 10 more minutes waiting for another wave. You've done that, I'm sure, in the ocean, at the beach. That's kind of like it is here. It's kind of like, this is a great wave if you do it right. And those are, again, I gave you a lot.
Yeah.
You got to do what fits best for you. But
That's great.
Think planting, not starting.
Yeah. No, one of the things we've been talking about with our team is how we communicate, launching that second service, because, the church is comfortable with the one service. They love it. Word's gotten out a little bit. You're like, oh, man, we got to go to two services, even though the parking lot's full, the room is full. But I've told the staff, we can't communicate this. Hey, I'm so sorry, folks. We have to go to two services.
100%.
We're really crowded. Like, it's a drudgery. It likes to be like it used to be. This is the most exciting thing that's ever happened to this church, right? So I love that plant mentality. Let me ask you about volunteers. What have you seen that works well with volunteers? Because obviously that's a big part of the organization of moving to the two services. Do you like the serve one, attend one model, or serve the full day, serve both services, or
I like
what
I
seems
personally
to work best?
I'm glad you brought that up. I like serve one, attend one. Some people, if it doesn't work for them, I'm not going to die on that hill. But serve one, attend one, I really like that. As it pertains, and I'm glad you brought that up, because as it pertains to launching a second service, planting a second service, or a third one. I was just talking to a pastor recently about now he's going to a third service. And what I always share with them is, man, be careful with that. You want to bring your team together and say, okay, we're going to go to a second service. We all know that. What do you need? What they normally do, Loren, is they'll normally just say, well, I've got 30 volunteers. I guess now I need 60. Like, they're not thinking strategically, like, wait a minute, maybe I need to redo how I look at this. And most of them don't. They just is like, oh, if I have 30 volunteers, now I need 60. If I have 5 leaders, now I need 10. Maybe, but it's an opportunity for you to be able to look at your team and go, what do you need? I just need more volunteers. No. What do you specifically need? And I would get very specific on what they need, not more. More is not an answer. 10 is an answer. More is not an answer. Okay, that's one thing. Secondly is get very specific on how many volunteers they need, and then ask the tough question. I mean, you got some time here. Ask the tough question and push a little bit on, is it time, could this be the time for your department, whoever you're talking to restructure? What does it mean to restructure? Because most people won't get that, Loren. They're not going to get, like, what does that mean to restructure? What they're not understanding is if they don't change the restructure, they won't be able to. If they don't restructure and adapt to that, they usually can't handle the weight of more people. So restructure, children's department. I always use that example because I think everybody can get that pretty quick. Here's the children's pastor. They probably have classroom coordinators and then a bunch of volunteers. Okay, that's one way of doing it. Probably the way that most of America's doing it. Children's pastor, classroom coordinator, bunch of volunteers. It's like, well, what if we changed it? What if instead of you leading the classroom coordinators, what if we said you have your own staff? What if it was like you or this, you got a service coordinator, a communication coordinator, a parent coordinator, a campus coordinator, a big event coordinator, and now you've got this staff of 6 that are running everything. Now, it's not only are you restructuring it for greater health, but you're starting to think differently because you're the one doing all the communication to the parent, but you shouldn't be. You're the one that's coordinating all the services, but you shouldn't be. Now, all of a sudden, it's, no, we need you, children's pastor, to rise up, develop your own staff. And the way I would communicate it, Loren, I'd look at the children's pastor and say, I walk in, I'm speaking like I'm you, I walk in, there's 8 staff members here, or whatever it is, 10 staff members, and we work on different things, and you guys all have different departments. You got to do the same thing with children. You got to have your own staff. Now you're leading leaders, you're not leading followers. The structure has to change to handle the weight. That table thing, you've heard me probably do it 1,000 times. Stand on a table, the third or fourth person that stands on it collapses. I've said it 1,000,000 times. And what I basically say is that table can only handle so much weight. Now, if you want it to handle more weight, what needs to change? The structure. You got to put more legs underneath the table or it can't handle the weight. You can't just have small little poles. Maybe you got to have big old pieces of wood. I mean, it's got to change or you can't handle more weight. Same thing with staff. So I would also, in addition to getting ready for this planting of a second service, I would start thinking about specifics. How many more do you need specifically? And can the structure handle the weight?
That's good.
And you're going to have to spell it out for them because if you just say structure differently, they're not going to think what we just talked about. They're not. And they're going to have to see, like, every time we make a jump, structure has to change. Make another jump, structure has to change. You and I own a McDonald's, that's great. You and I own 3 McDonald's, we can probably manage it. If you and I buy 30 McDonald's from some other guy in Nebraska, everything's got to change on how you and I are running the business because now we have 33 McDonald's. You and I can't just run to each one. Same thing here. It's like, okay, that's great to get us to whatever the number of the church is, 1,000, whatever. But if we go to a second service and we grow to 1,500, 1,800, you're not going to be able to handle it because the weight, it can't handle the weight. Does that make sense? Does that help?
It does. It does. Yeah, I really appreciate that. And I think that's constructive conversations we need to have.
I would have that with the entire staff.
Yeah.
I think they need to know how many people they're going to be launching. And I would have that conversation with the entire staff with how many people they need and how they need to restructure. So
that's anyway, great. I appreciate that.
Yeah. What else you got on your mind?
Let me pivot and ask a question about how we can improve receiving guest information through our connection cards. It just seems over the last couple of years, the number of guest cards that are coming in that number is dropping, right? So people are more reluctant to give you their information. And I know I heard you teach recently about, we need 5 guests per 100 attendees. And in our church where we have, a larger congregation, I'm really not sure how many guests are there, right? I don't know everybody in the room. So it's hard to gauge that. And of course, you can't follow up without their information and get them in the process, get them in the cycle unless you get that information. So do you have any wisdom on how we can improve on that?
Yeah. Here's a thought for you. I know that I work with Convoy of Hope, kind of representing to a lot of pastors Convoy and helping to do that. They're obviously, for those that don't know that are watching this podcast, they're an amazing organization, feed children around the world. So I would suggest, whether it's Convoy Hope or not, one of the things that I like doing is, hey, man, if you're here for the first time, and man, we would love to collect your data. We'd like to give you a gift, and here's the gift. You're going to have the gift of feeding a child today. Man, everybody that hits the QR code, everybody that fills out this card that's new here today, on your behalf, a child will be fed today. Giving away a mug doesn't seem to get anybody so excited. But when you say you're going to feed someone today, most people aren't going to go, I am not filling out that card. I don't care if I'm feeding a hungry kid or not. Like, most people are not that cold. So I have seen lots of churches, very large churches. I've sat there on a Sunday morning speaking at extremely large churches, and they do it. And when they flipped over to that, they saw the numbers start going up. You just got to get the right verbiage so it doesn't feel manipulative. But I think just getting it out there. Right. We want your information to be able to help follow. We'd love to follow up with you and just say thank you for coming. We just want to say thank you for coming. We don't want to annoy you. Right. And we want to give you a gift. And our gift today is you're going to help us feed children, because at this church, we believe in feeding people. You get a win because you dialogue about mission. You get a win because you're talking about feeding and changing the world. And people love being a part of a church like that, even if they're unchurched. And then you get a win because a child gets fed. Now, you figure that out, in the Convoy world, that's a couple bucks. So, you just do the math and figure it out, like, okay, well, that's probably an extra $300 or $400 going to Convoy every month or something like that. Okay. Right. But We can justify and actually say that. You can attach it to a local thing that you do. Maybe that's more popular, whatever. But one way or another, someone's going to be fed when you fill this out. You just got to figure out the right verbiage, make sure who's ever communicating it gets it right. But that has, in a lot of cases, 90% of the time, you start seeing a radical increase of people that fill out guest cards.
Wow. That's really great. I love that. Yeah, people aren't too excited about your coffee mug or your T-shirt. That type of thing. That's kind of
but feeding children.
So, yeah, I love that.
Feeding children. I mean, come on, man. Like, it don't matter if you're far from God, or and you're kind of a kind of a wild person in your own personal life. You're not going to put down feeding children. So, like I said, I think it grabs the information, but it also makes it sort of a subliminal statement to the audience, and especially to the guests, like, hey, just so you know, you're new here, but we feed people. We love helping those in need. No one balks at that. People like belonging to an organization that does that. So you get a lot of wins out of it.
Right. Yeah, I think that's great advice.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, try it out. See what happens. Worst case scenario, you just feed more people. So that's never a bad thing. So that's awesome. Yeah. Anything else I can help you with today? Any other things on your mind?
Yeah. Let me throw one more thing at you. With this challenge has to do primarily with department leaders, maybe not so much paid staff, but volunteer department leaders who really love their role, really love doing what they do. But we're trying to encourage them to become a developer of others and to get as much joy out of developing others as they do actually doing their ministry. We're finding that in the process, coming out of Growth Track, that the speed of engagement is not as fast as it could be, getting people plugged in on those teams, simply because sometimes that department leader is just reluctant to include others, to bring them in, to train them, and to release them. And so, this is becoming a concern, and it's a challenge we're facing, and love to hear your thoughts.
That's always a wall when you come up against that, because it forces you, when you start having people, when you're trying to make a culture change and you're trying to get people to start recruiting, speed of engagement, all that stuff, when you're and they're reluctant, and this is going to sound a little, I don't want to say harsh, but I would give it a time frame, because I think there's early, mid, and late adopters, and you have to accept that. There's some people that just like, hey, whatever Pastor Loren says, we do. Right. And the other people like, we'll do it in about 3 months, and the other people will do it in about 8 months. So there are early, mid, and late adopters, and I think that's a reality you have to say. The second reality is you are changing. Speed of engagement changes the yard markers. You're changing the rules in the middle of the game, and that's a reality too. There's nothing wrong with it, but that's a reality. With all that said, because I've come up against it, other people, and I've had that question asked to me many times. I always say, okay, you're changing the yard markers, early, mid, late adopters. Those are all realities. One thing we can do is celebrate those that are doing it, making sure that in volunteer meetings and leaders meetings, hey man, I want to give a shout out to Sam. Sam's been raising up people. He just raised up 2 new leaders, 7 more volunteers. Let's give him a hand. Like, make it a thing, make it something you celebrate. The whole invite culture. It's the same with any culture. Stories you tell, here's you make things you celebrate. Celebrate. That way you can see, or some of the mids start to get involved, some of the late adopters to start getting involved. So celebrate it, make it, this is who we are. Celebrate the heck out of it as much as you can. But there's got to be a time, whether that's 4 months, 6 months, 8 months, there's got to be a time where you in your mind say, if I can't get a change, I probably need to make a change. After I've done everything I can. I've communicated the vision. I've made it clear. We got a lot of people that are jumping on board. I'm celebrating it. I'm making stories out of it. I'm trying to change the culture, celebrate all the stuff. But man, we're on month whatever, 6, 7, 8, and they still are not, they just are reluctant. That's when you have to say, okay, if they're unwilling to make a change, then they're forcing me to make a change after you've done all this stuff. Right. And if you feel like I've done all the things that we just talked about, and I've got 3 people that still won't change, the head of the first impressions, the head of this, the head of that, whatever.
Right.
I think you have to make a change, and you have to have that honest conversation. If you don't, then I think you unintentionally make a poor statement to your current leaders. I always say the worst thing you can do for your strong leaders is to tolerate a weak one. It's the worst thing you could do. And so give it a time, but then at some point it's like, hey, I want to talk to you one more time. I really need you to start doing this. You hear us. We've celebrated for the last 6 months all these people that are starting to do it and all the amazing stuff that's coming out of it. I need you to do this. And if they don't, then maybe it's time to shift them into a role where recruiting, not kick them off the bus, but put them in a different seat.
Sure.
After you've done all that.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. Yeah. The challenging work of
it's the joy, isn't
it? You have to do it, but you're right. At some point, you got to make.
You do. At some point, you do.
That's good.
I've always said you're one tough conversation away from a breakthrough. I think that could happen in that department. That one tough conversation, but that whole worst thing you can do for your strong leaders to tolerate a weak one. When I teach on that, I always say, don't think that the strong leaders aren't thinking it. Don't think that they're not scratching their head and going home and telling the wife, why doesn't he deal with it? It's like he just lets them get away with anything. Like, they're thinking it, whether they say it to you or not. And they may be voicing it to someone they know. Right. So don't think they're not.
Right.
And so you got to, after you've done all that, then you got to be, okay, no, this is the last conversation I'm going to have. And if the person doesn't change, then I got to find another seat for them on the bus. Yeah.
So
does that help?
That's awesome. It does.
Well, hey,
thank you so much.
Thanks for being on today, man, and thanks for jumping on. And man, you're doing an incredible work, and man, just keep it up. God's doing awesome things in your church, and man, I just think you're just getting started, and I think there's so much coming.
Appreciate that.
All right. Have a good day, my man. What a great conversation we had with Loren. What a great subject it is. We've all been there before. Hope you enjoyed it. Also, again, a reminder, check out churchboom.org for all the different opportunities we have for personal growth and development and ways that you can grow your ministry. Hope you enjoyed the conversation. We'll see you next time.